Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It's Thursday, May 1st, 2025. It's about 11:15, and we have just had a break, and now we are going to talk about the language part of the budget and what.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Grady with us to talk to us about that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Grady Nixon, Joint Fiscal. So the first document we have is this one pager, the H489 and Big Bill reconciliation. So this is just a map of how the Senate worked the second BAA, mostly the second BAA into the Big Bill since it did not pass. Section 50, which was Act 113, B1100, FY25 one-time appropriations, was moved into Section C103 because there were one-time appropriations in C103 of the budget already. So just consolidating all of those changes to Act 113 one-time appropriations in Section C103. They also removed the appropriation to the treasurer. So the committee may recall that there was an appropriation made to Act 113, Section D103, there was an appropriation made to the treasurer in the amount of $14 million. And then in the House budget, they reduced that by $10 million to bring it to $4 million. Because the BAA didn't happen, they cut that appropriation language in both instances. In Section 52, Act 113 D101 FY25 fund transfers, again, because there were FY25 fund transfers already in the Big Bill, those were moved into Section C102. Section 54 FY25 reserves. This was amending a number that the House reserved in the BAA to carry forward into FY26, so that $136 million figure. That's removed entirely because the Senate has a different year-end closeout construct. And again, that language didn't occur in the BAA, so it couldn't be amended in the Big Bill any longer. Section 56, Act 78, E100, that's positions created in FY24. There was a section of the bill that also addressed this. So that was moved into Section E312.1. Section 67, that's Act 78, one-time appropriations. Again, there was a section that already addressed this same section of Act 78. So those were moved into Section C104. Section 72, that was statutory amendments relating to DigSafe. So changing the 48 hours notice to 72. That was removed entirely because it's being carried in the Senate T-bill. Section 87, amending the 2023 capital bill. That was removed entirely. That relates to this amendment to the Sergeant at Arms appropriation for the purchase of an X-ray machine. That language is now in the 2025 capital bill, so it's removed here.
Been all along.
With the allowance that they can spend the money on chairs.
So it was originally for chairs. They had leftover money, so it allows them to use it for X-ray purchase as well.
Break a chair, you pay for it.
$100.
I know.
Fair enough.
Section 88 was the amendment to the General Assistance Emergency Housing language. This was removed entirely to be addressed in elsewhere. And then Section 92, the effective dates section was removed entirely because the effective dates are now carried in the effective dates section of the Big Bill.
I just asked Brady that it was removed entirely. Is the assumption that it'll be in H91?
I can't speak to that.
Okay.
And then all other sections of the BAA were moved into the F sections of the bill. So now there's a rather long F section that has everything else that happened to the BAA. And then big bill sections that were impacted by this shift around. Section C103, again, just removed the appropriation to the treasurer. And then Section C106 was removed entirely. Again, that relates to the House year-end closeout.
Any questions on that? Does it sound vaguely familiar since we had a few rounds of the budget adjustment? Okay, thanks, Grady.
And then we'll move on to this Christmas tree document. So you'll see it's lots of red and green, but pretty short document, so it shouldn't take too much time.
Had a joke.
Have a joke?
I'm pretty intelligent.
Or need a laugh. Need a laugh.
Oh, do we have one more copy?
Here, I can do mine on the computer.
More than that?
You need a copy?
No, it's okay. Jim just was clutching to it.
I would just flag a couple things for the committee before we get into this document. One, because of the descriptions and then also changes in the House versus the Senate, unfortunately, the sections don't line up perfectly. So you'll see that even though they're the same section, when you're looking at it, the language might be on the next page. I would also note that this only includes sections that either the House or Senate changed from the GovRec. All of GovRec language that's been the same throughout the whole process is excluded from this document. So no sections that were unchanged by either body are included here.
And I know this is an enormous amount of work, so I'm thanking you in advance.
Ooh, yeah.
This is amazing.
And then the final notice before we jump into this is just the language that is pulled into this document is from the annotated copies of the bills, so the working documents, not the final language in the addendums or the House calendar. So just for the committee's awareness, there might be small edits that we tweaked here and there that aren't reflected in this language. So if something looks off, it's likely just because it's slightly outdated from the most recent version of the bill. So always defer to the Senate addendum or the House as passed bill, but it should have 99% of everything. On page 1, you'll see descriptions of the one-time appropriations. I won't go through this again because Emily covered it pretty well, but you'll see in red House changes and then in green Senate changes. Continuing on to page 8, this is where you'll see the House and Senate versions of section B1101. In the House version, this adds language directing finance and management to fulfill the requirements of 32 VSA 308, the General Fund Stabilization Reserve, and Act 113, section D103, which was where in the BAA language carried forward 136 million from FY25 to FY26. It then directs the Commissioner of Finance and Management to reserve remaining funds for federal funding shortfalls and allows JFC to make recommendations to the E-Board on the transfer of those funds when the General Assembly is not in session. This.
You can continue the same thing before you move to the cash fund balances.
The Senate added language directing finance and management to fulfill the requirements of 32 VSA 308 and designate the first 138,970,000 of remaining funds as unallocated carry forward to use to execute contingent transactions made in subsection B of this section. Any remaining funds are directed to be reserved according to 32 VSA 308C, the rainy day fund pension split. The contingent transactions are 5 million to the Communications and Information Technology Special Fund for the billable services transition and 45 million to be appropriated to AOA for the E-Board to transfer in the event of federal funding shortfalls.
We're trying to do a little bit in advance of having some money. I would just say that even though Grady skipped over the much of the 1100 section, there is some language in there about some of the things that the Senate is doing and where it's going. So it would be good to read that on your own time.
And as Emily mentioned, there are a couple of those Senate B1100 one-time appropriations that have language later on in the bill. So you'll see that later on too. Section B1103 on page 9, the House Cash Fund Subaccount A Appropriations, and then the Senate Subaccount A Appropriations. So you'll see the Senate changes again in green. So $14 million is the total in sub A, and then the appropriations are mostly on page 10.
Those are the fees there.
Continuing on, section C102. So the House reduced the GovRec T fund to TIB fund transfer by 1.4 million. The Senate incorporated all of the other FY25 transfers that were in the BAA. So it looks like the Senate changed a lot in this section, but there's really no disagreement between the House and Senate here. They just took everything that was in the BAA and added it to this section and made no change to that TIB transfer.
Okay, so this is what BAA should say.
On page 12, this in the House, this added in FY25 one-time appropriations for grants to flood impacted municipalities, to VHCB for developmentally disabled housing pilot, and the judiciary network / bathroom renovation. It also reduced the appropriation to the treasurer that was in the second VAA, H489. So H489 again appropriated that 14 million to the treasurer, and then that appropriation was amended in the House version of the big bill to only be $4 million. And then the Senate, because the BAA did not pass, took out that amendment to the appropriation that never happened. The Senate section also adds in all other FY25 one-time appropriations that were in H489. And just to note, two changes here from the House version. One, they moved out the reversion date for municipal grant funds. So in the House language, it said, I believe, any funds remaining unencumbered and unexpended by June 30th would revert. And because of the timing of the bill, the Senate deemed that that was too short a timeline to get those grants out. So they extended it to September 30th instead of 2025. So this is a separate issue from everything.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You'll see that ARPA language.
Yeah.
Later. And then the other substantive change here, somewhat substantive, is just that the Senate split out the $850,000 appropriation to the judiciary per the request of the judiciary. So rather than having it be $850,000 for network security and bathroom renovation, it's just carried as two separate appropriations.
That's what we wanted. That's fine. Great.
On page 15, this is section C104. So the House removed GovRec language regarding a change to a $15 million appropriation. Not because the House disagreed with the governor, but because it evaluated that change to that appropriation could occur in the BAA. And then it left this change to this appropriation for the big bill. And so now that change to that $15 million appropriation is in section C104, along with all other BAA changes to FY24 one-time appropriations that were in H489.
Those look familiar.
On page 17, House section C106 amended BAA added language to reserve 136 million FY25 to use in FY26. So this language first appeared in the BAA as 133.5 million, and then the House amended that BAA language or that BAA amendment to the FY25 big bill to update it to 136 million. To be reserved. And again, the Senate struck this section in its entirety because the BAA didn't occur. On page 18, section C107. So the GovRec language had this originally as an amendment to an appropriation that never occurred. So it was striking out something that never happened. And so the House cleaned that language up. This relates to the 7 million that was authorized by the E-Board for BGAP in response to the 24 floods. There was some money left over. It's directing 2 million of that money to be for a grant to VITA to establish a disaster relief fund. The Senate made no change to that section. D101, this is FY26 fund transfers. So the House made updates to the cash fund transfer, reduced the communications information technology fund transfer, reduced the environmental contingency fund transfer, and added transfer to the crime victims restitution fund. The Senate made its own update to the cash fund transfer. It increased the environmental contingency fund transfer, which relates to that PCV appropriation. It updates the cannabis and substance misuse prevention fund transfers. Those are two separate funds to the latest data. So that's not a policy, that decision, that was just updated data on cannabis revenue. And adds childcare contribution special fund transfer language. It also corrects two fund names. So the crime victims restitution fund transfer should have been to the domestic and sexual violence special fund. And then it just adds in clarifying language. You'll see on page 19 in green, just that the other infrastructure and essential investments and reserve sub-account in the cash fund. So just a little clarity there.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm just noticing the difference between the House being on the environmental contingency fund. Can you restate that? Those in the House version, it was 5.5 million, and in Senate, it's 9.5.
Correct.
Where did that 4 million come from?
I'm not sure if I can speak to exactly where that 4 million came from. It was the Senate went with the GovRec for that. So there was the appropriation for
4 million out of it, or 5 or whatever, and they put it back.
Okay, thank you.
And then this is a section where I would just note again, the nature of this being a working document, or being pulled from a working document. So it doesn't reflect that Senate amendment that occurred yesterday, which is adding that $1 million transfer to the new farm security special fund. So you won't see that in this language, but Senate did do that just for the committee's awareness. On page 20, that's the reversion section, D102. The House reverted 2 million from VHFA. And then the Senate added that $6 million reversion from the treasurer for the bond redemption appropriation. So that's, again, that originally $20 million appropriation. The 14 million was pulled for emergency responses. And then there was 6 million left, and the entirety of that has been reverted now.
And with this budget, we never hear about that again. We spent more time on that 20 million.
On page 21, so the House updated the stabilization reserve number and added a reference to the $136 million it reserved in the BAA. And then the Senate, again, updated the stabilization reserve number, removed that reference to the 136 million, and reserved 5 million in the child care contribution special fund. On page 22, so this is the position sections for the House and the Senate. The House added position language for the Attorney General and the Human Rights Commission. The Senate added language for the Secretary of State, the Green Mountain Care Board, Fish and Wildlife, the State Labor Relations Board, states attorneys and sheriffs, the Criminal Justice Council, the Cannabis Control Board, the Treasurer, and LURB, the Land Use Review Board.
Didn't we have 3 positions for Green Mountain Care Board that were originally at?
That was in the governor's budget.
Yeah, but I thought we kept it.
We did keep those.
I don't believe that there was language for those positions because they were from the pool.
Here from the pool.
Right, it says pool, if you look at the position.
And so again, here, the Senate section also, there are pool positions that aren't reflected in the language.
So these are the new position.
On page 23, so the House added language for a report on community-based organization funding. The Senate removed this section and added language, somewhat replacing it in section E 300.2.
So Dave, you'll check that out maybe.
What section was that again?
300.2,
Now, 3.2, which we haven't found to you. It's a bit further on.
On page 24, section E 100.2. This directs the Secretary of Administration to report on federal revenue reductions to the JFC in calendar year 25. The Senate made no change to this section. Section E 100.3 directs the Secretary of Administration to report on ARPA appropriations and general fund appropriations for ARPA-related projects, those quote-unquote cured dollars, and revert any unencumbered and unexpended spending authority on July 1st, 2027. And also directs the Secretary of Administration to report on that reversion to the Joint Fiscal Committee. This is where Madam Chair mentioned, this is the Senate action where they extended the reversion date to December 31st, 2027. There was some concern that if the reversions were to occur in the middle of a summer construction season, that could not only disrupt those projects, but also might disrupt the ability for them to get contracts in the first place.
Another whole year to finish these things.
The entirety of 2027 rather than,
Right.
yeah.
So what I'm saying is, yes,
The
in
original,
6 months, they're giving them a whole year.
it also makes the reversion report due to the appropriations committees rather than the Joint Fiscal Committee, just given the timing of the reversion now. The General Assembly will be in session, so it makes sense for it to go to the appropriations committees. On page 25, section E 105, the House added language directing the Agency of Digital Services to request additional funding in the budget adjustment, the FY 26 budget adjustment for billable services transition if funds transferred to the Communications Information Technology Fund are insufficient, rather than billing back agencies and departments. The Senate just made a technical correction that was in the administration's technical letter, just clarifying that ADS should utilize from the Internal Service Fund appropriation in B 105 of this act an amount of funds equal to that transfer.
So is this gonna mean when BAA comes next time, we won't have all the agencies having a budget adjustment for IT?
So the Gov Rec had 15 million for this services transition. Both the House and Senate had 10 million, and then the Senate also has a contingent 5 million appropriation, which would get them to the whole 15. I believe ADS, the estimate could be higher than that. So I'm not sure if this
Well,
complete the
white
transfer.
out, but it should maybe alleviate that.
The intent behind the transition is to centralize this rather than have it be a state entity by state entity request. Section E 111. So this is where the House E 111, E 111.1, the House added the annual income tax link-up language. The Senate made no change to those sections. On page 26, the House made a statutory amendment to ensure that couples filing jointly at the federal level also file jointly at the state level. The Senate made no change to that section. Section E 111.3 was not in the House version. This is language to apply current law to tax exempt organizations in tax year 2025, regardless of any amendments or changes at the federal level. So this is ensuring that the Department of Taxes treats tax exempt organizations according to current policy rather than any potential future changes. Section E-127, the House added interim budget adjustment language. So there are a few sections in both bills that deal with this. This includes language relating to Joint Fiscal Committee recommendations to the E-Board on said adjustments and potential use of the General Fund Balance Reserve. And there was a B3 that was being added to statute. This is addressed in session law instead in the Senate's version of the bill in section E-127.3. So the Senate just removed it from statute, but the intent of that language lives on. Section E-127.1 on page 28. This is E-Board authority to draw on the General Fund Balance Reserve relating to section E-127. So this is just adding in the underlined there, you'll see, and General Fund Balance Reserve. The Senate made no change to that section. Section E-127.2 is again a section relating to E-Board authority to draw on the General Fund Balance Reserve relating to section E-127. And somewhat annoyingly, this is another subdivision B3 that was struck from statute and moved to session law in section E-127.4. So two different subdivision B3s were removed relating to this. But again, the Senate didn't make any policy change there beyond moving it from statute to session law. Section E-127.3 on page 30. So this was not in the House version of the bill. This is where that first sub B, sub 3 is added to session law. So this relates to interim budget adjustments and language for the Joint Fiscal Committee recommendation to the E-Board on said adjustments and potential use of General Fund Balance Reserve.
So I think this may have been what Emily went over with us last week on Friday. Yeah. Okay.
On page 31, section E-127.4, this is E-Board authority to draw on the General Fund Balance Reserve relating to section E-127. This is the second subdivision B3 that was moved to session law instead of statute. Section E-127.5 was not in the House version of the bill either. This is language for the final JFO managed fee report. So there's for the past couple of years, the Joint Fiscal Office has overseen a fee report for certain sections of government rather than trying to get an entire fee report of the entirety of state government. So this is language that would complete that 3-year cycle. And the Joint Fiscal Office would work with the agencies and departments mentioned to ensure that we complete that fee report cycle. On page 33, section E-131, this was language recommended originally by the treasurer. It makes various amendments to the VT Saves program, which now and forevermore shall be the Vermont Saves program. The Senate made no change to that section. On page 35, section E-131.1, this again was treasurer recommended language, making the municipal equipment loan fund, the municipal equipment and vehicle loan fund. The Senate made no change to that section. On page 37, section E-131.2, this was treasurer requested language, making the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee review and report biennial rather than annual, and adding in criteria to include in the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee's considerations for that report and recommendation. The Senate removed the changes that would make that report and review biennial, but it kept the criteria amendments. So you'll see in green on page 38, the Senate didn't actually make any change to that language. It was just in the original way it was drafted, that sub 11 would have come before the sub 9, I believe, which would have been cumbersome for the administration to address in reference throughout their work. So the Senate just shifted it to be a new sub 11. On page 39, section E 133. So this is the first of 3 sections you'll see where the Senate did not accept changes relating to VPIC compensation. So E 133, E 134, and E 514.1, you'll see number changes relating to that Senate decision.
Well, Chris had to put them all in and then take them all out.
So
Chris.
the House made updates to it. The Senate did not accept that. So it made updates, but the numbers in GovRec weren't reflective of the accurate numbers. So the Senate numbers don't match the GovRec, a third set of numbers. Same thing for section E 134. And then sections E 134.1 and E 134.2. That the first section here is adding the authority to hire a consultant to the VPIC statute. And then the second is language relating to the compensation consultant report. So the Senate, because it did not accept the compensation decisions, deleted both of those sections. On page 41, this was House added language establishing the municipal grand list stabilization program. The GovRec had the municipal buyout program. The House added the municipal grand list stabilization program. And then in section E 142.3, the voluntary buyout program for flood prone properties, sort of replacing that GovRec construct. The Senate made no change to those sections. On page 42, section E 200.1, this was not in the House version of the bill. Sections E 200.1 and E 200.2 are updates to fees that directly impact the Attorney General's budget. The Attorney General, it's an amount roughly $42,000 that they would expect from these fee increases that they factored into their budget, but the language wasn't included in the budget bill itself. So the Senate added both of these fee changes in those sections to make sure that the Attorney General's budget is balanced. On page 43, section E 208.1, this is a new Senate section, section E 208.1. This relates to presentation for the FY27 budget process from the Department of Public Safety for a capital plan on the replacement of firearms and mobile and portable radio equipment. Section E 208.2 establishes the Community Radio Grant Program. This is one of those sections where there's language relating to a one-time appropriation. I forget the bill that this language is also being carried in, but there's another bill that has this same language in it.
Yeah, this was in a prior iteration of H397.
Right.
That language was removed by the House because we didn't fund it, but that's where it is.
Where is H 397?
Senate Bill Ops.
Are they taking testimony or anything? Do you know anything about it?
They are taking testimony on it. But this language does not currently live in that bill.
Okay. Which is why we need, if they want it, they need it here. Okay. Thank you.
Page 44, section E 215. So the House decreased National Guard tuition benefit program allocation to align with anticipated take-up. And then the Senate increased the National Guard tuition benefit program allocation to align with anticipated take-up. So the House decreased it by $100,000 and then the Senate restored it to by $100,000. Section E 232 on page 45. The House increased the Vermont Access Network grant by $50,000. The Senate made no change to that section. Section E 232.1 is a Senate add. This again relates to a one-time appropriation made by the Senate. This is the local civic journalism awards.
Oh, wait, so this is where,
Correct.
so,
So this language directs the Secretary of State to collaborate with the UVM centers, the UVM Center for Community News, to make cash awards to local civic journalism organizations or businesses with funds appropriated in the B1100 section. And the Secretary of State, in collaboration with the University of Vermont Center for Community News, shall establish award criteria and assemble a panel of 3 to 5 journalists, academics, or industry veterans who neither work for eligible organizations nor are eligible to receive awards themselves to determine award recipients.
so Grady, this is one-time money. Do we know who brought this to the Senate? How it got there? Because we never heard anything about it while we were, this in S-119.
I don't believe this was in another bill. This was brought to the committee by the chair.
By the chair of Senate Appropriations.
Yes, not by the chair of House Appropriations.
Well, I know that, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, yes.
Oh,
This is not attached to any bill.
all right, we need to talk.
I don't believe so.
It's not attached to any bill. It just showed up.
Just appeared.
The Christmas tree lives on. Okay, thank you, Grady.
Section E 236.1, this was House added language specifying that the 1.8 million appropriated to the Department of Liquor and Lottery is for business to business website design and implementation. I have no change here. Just to flag for the committee, there was a tweak the Senate made from the technical letter, changing of to for. So for on-premise licensees rather than of on-premise licensees. So apologies for that. Section E 300.1. This is language requiring the Agency of Human Services and its departments to report on residential youth beds as part of the FY27 budget process. The Senate made no change to that section. Section E 300.2 did not exist in the House bill. This is a report from the Agency of Human Services on community-based provider operations. So this relates to that struck House section E 100.1.
So it was in the House.
So
They moved it here.
the House had different language relating to the
Yeah.
same concept in E 100.1.
Yep.
And then this is language that crosses over on the same subject, but is in E 300.2.
And the reason it's here is because we had, the original one had the agency administration.
Correct,
And this has human services.
which is fine.
And, all right, so yeah, I want to be sure you're okay with this language, Dave.
Mhm.
The other thing is, what was it we passed this week? That was the home and community-based services, we took out community-based services.
That was the rate setting bills at the
Yeah.
House.
Okay, so this,
And they
that's not,
changed the definition
Right.
to separate from
that's separate from this. Okay,
the section is correct.
okay, great, thank you.
I wanted to say, community base, that's the designated and to get the designated and the approved and not approved. That's the right word. That's these lumped together. Or is this, are these different?
It's hard to
You're
hear.
using
We
a
can't
term.
hear
Understand.
It's area agencies on aging, community action agencies, the DAs and the SSAs, and parent-child centers.
So DAs and SSAs, those are the names I was trying to get out of, sit back.
Sorry.
So this goes along with what I sort of been calling for is that they start working together. So it sounds like this is asking for that.
That's the
That
intent.
would be performed more effectively cost, yes, that's, which is exactly what we had in a different section that they're moving to here.
On page 47, section E 300.3, this is another new section in the Senate. This is a report on anticipated settlement funds from the UVM Green Mountain Care Board. E 300.301.4. This is another new section. This makes certain provider rate increases effective on November 1 rather than on July 1.
This is the Senator Westman construct.
So this, in anticipation of federal funding shortfalls, this was something the Senate added to delay those rate increases into later in the calendar year.
Which also delays the Medicare. We leave money on the table. Yep, so that we'll have to understand that better.
Section E306, the House added this. It directs extraordinary financial relief to be used to prevent nursing home closures and requires a report presentation from Diva and Dale. The Senate cut the first sentence from the House language. So the first sentence said extraordinary financial relief shall be used in rare occasions or as a last resort to prevent nursing homes that are in good standing and in compliance with state and federal regulations from closing. The Senate struck that sentence.
Okay. Why? But you probably don't know why.
Maybe we can
Maybe they don't.
put it as intent, like a small section that says intent.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Grady.
On page 48, this is another new Senate section, E306.1. So this is where they increase the Quimby threshold from 145% of the federal poverty level to 150%. Section E306.2 aligns open enrollment with current practice. Section E306.3 also does the same. So this was AHS requested language, these next few sections, mainly just aligning statute with current and existing practice. Section E307, this is language that strikes the Self-Employment Contribution Act tax payment requirement from Medicaid statute. I believe the intent is to make it a little easier for people to get access to benefits, and they estimated a de minimis impact from that.
So on page 50, is this where the change is the underlined part?
Yes, and then the strike language. So striking Self-Employment Contributions Act tax payments from the requirements and what is documented.
This is that section. E307. Lynn, is that yours?
Either Lynn or mine, we can work it out.
Yeah, okay.
Sounds like a diva thing, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if the two of you can figure that out and help me understand it, that would be terrific. Thank you. Okay.
Section E307.1, this is AHS language relating to emergency rulemaking authority for the Agency of Human Services. So it allows the agency to adopt rules to amend Vermont's rules regarding Medicaid and the operation of the Vermont Health Benefit Exchange in response to state and federal law.
So if things change, we're all waiting to see what happens with Medicaid, and this is some language around support.
Yeah, because under the rule that's stated right now, this wouldn't fit under emergency rulemaking without this language change.
Oh, without the language change. Okay. Good to know. Hopeful that you're an LCAR. Thank you.
Section E311 was House added language repealing the sunset of the State Youth Council. The Senate made no change to that section. Section E312, the House updated language from the GovRec to align with legislative intent. So this language relating to HIV/AIDS funding was worked on and negotiated last session. And the language that was sent over in the GovRec was the old language. So the House just corrected it to the new language. The Senate made no change to that section. Section E312.1 on page 52. The House amends FY24 established positions to correct where the Health Equity Advisory Commission is based. The Senate made no change to that, but again, this is one of those sections that was touched on by the BAA. So it adds in the amendments that were made in the BAA to position titles for the Treasurer's Office. Section E312.2 was added by the House. These next few sections relate to the move of the Health Equity Advisory Commission. So the GovRec had language relating to this, but Ledge Council reviewed it and found it to be incomplete and that a few more things needed to be amended to complete this transition. So E312.2, E312.3, and then continuing on to page 55, E312.4 are all the Ledge Council language to make that happen. The Senate made no change to those House sections. Section E312.7, this is a new section added by the Senate. This is a Department of Health report on prevention expenditures due to the committees of jurisdiction on or before January 15th, 2026. So reviewing all state and federal funds, including special funds appropriated from or otherwise designated for substance use prevention efforts. On page 56, section E316, House added language extending the stakeholder working group on justice involved youth for 2 years. The Senate made no change to that section. Section E316.1, this is the first of 2 of those budgetary inflation assessments. This one is for DCF, and then you'll see another section later on that's for Dale. The Senate made no change to this section. On page 57, this is Senate added language. This is a report from DCF and the Chief Superior Judge on the supervised visitation program and recommendations for sustainable funding sources for the statewide coordination of supervised visitation. Section E317, this is Senate added language extending the rulemaking deadline by a year. So it's my understanding that without this language, the Department for Children and Families would have to adopt rules relating to, I believe it's Act 152 of 2022. This is the Child Abuse Prevention Registry. They would have to establish rules twice. This extension allows them to work on the rules and not have to establish interim rules. Section E318 on page 58. This is a Senate added language. There were other childcare changes that Emily mentioned. And while we were doing that, we reviewed statute and realized that CCFAP was incorrectly referenced in statute here. So we just made a technical change to make sure that it's referred to correctly.
And that was in the bill that we passed out earlier this week. The same thing, which changes to the correct thing. So at least we're all on the same page. It's good.
Section E321 is the general assistance emergency housing language for FY26. The Senate made no change to that section. And then jumping all the way to page 62. The House made no change to this section from GovRec. The Senate just updated the number. Section E.
Why would they, was there a number in there before?
Yes, I'd have to go back to the GovRec to find it.
Yeah, I guess at some point I'd be curious to know what. Why did it change?
So I believe it was a technical correction. It was 26 in the GovRec, but I believe it was section E325, DCF OEO.
325, so.
It's my understanding this was in the technical letter.
Okay, great, thanks.
Section E329, House added language. So this is that second budgetary inflation section. This one is for Dale.
Yes, reporting, yep.
Section E333 was language added by the House delaying implementation of Dale's payment reform process and directing the department to align case management with its existing payment model. The Senate made no change to that section. Section E338.1 was House added language relating to a report on federal funds for recovery coaching for incarcerated individuals. The administration flagged that the federal funds for relating to that did not come through, so the Senate struck that section.
Is that something we're aware of, Trevor?
Yeah,
Okay,
the corrections institutions wanted this language because there was uncertainty, but now it's certain.
now it's certain, so, okay.
Makes sense.
NA, okay, great.
Section E 338.2 was House added language relating to a report on the Department of Corrections consultant for the Northeast Correctional Complex or Caledonia County Work Camp transition to a treatment-focused facility. The Senate updated the appropriation in section B 1100, so the number was updated in this section. So the Senate increased that appropriation to $250,000. It was originally $300,000 in the GovRec.
Right, and then that was one of the ones I was gonna ask you about too, Trevor, because they had said they only needed 200,000, so we took 100,000 out. Now the Senate added back 50 of that 100,000.
I had a conversation with DOC about it yesterday. They claimed they didn't ask the extra.
Okay, great, we'll figure that out. Thank you.
Section E 500.1, Senate added language. This just is the House language that was in B 1100 relating to the 4 million for education transformation. Because the Senate moved that money to the base as $1 million for the next 4 years. The language relating to the education transformation funding just was moved to this section here. On page 64, section E 504.1, this House just updated the number in sub 5 per the formula. The Senate made no change to that section. E 504.2, amend statute to direct AOE to pay adult ed providers according to the formula in the State Board of Education rules. The Senate made no change to that section. On page 65, section E 504.3, this is a report from the Agency of Education on adult education funding. The Senate added the Agency of Administration to the report and also requires a recommendation from the Secretary of Administration on adult ed administration. Section E 514.1, this is that third section relating to the VPIC compensation.
Yeah.
So the House updated the numbers and then the Senate did not accept that, so updated numbers again. On page 66, section E 602.1, this is a Senate added section. This amends a section that's been amended quite a few times. This eliminates the final Vermont State College's structural deficit payment.
Great.
What does that mean?
So the language originally was 5 million each year for 5 years. Then that was amended to be 5 million for the first 3 years and then 3.5 million for the following 2 years. This amends it again to just be the $3.5 million payment that occurred this year and not requiring a final $3.5 million payment. So for the coming year, Vermont State Colleges is not required to make that $3.5 million structural deficit payment.
Which I don't know that it's a payment, it was a reduction.
Oh, sorry, reduce, yeah, sorry.
So they're not requiring the final 3.5 million.
They're not giving the last fifth year. That would help us reduce that structural deficit, but the structural deficit still needs to be reduced.
It's just not requiring.
Reneging on the commitment?
Yeah, I'm a little confused, quite frankly.
Yeah, it sounds like they're telling us we don't have to do it, but of course, if we don't do it, you know, we're not, we still have to do it.
Still have to do it.
They made
No,
an
we
agreement.
aren't reneging on our
You are-
money, we're still
No.
paying them, but it sounds like that we've changed the deal with Vermont State University in language at any rate.
Well, actually, it was supposed to be
State
another 5
colleges,
million.
yes.
Right, I mean, part of the deal was we were gonna give them 5 million a year for 5 years, and they were
Yeah.
gonna reduce 5 million a year for
Right.
5
Yes,
years.
yes, that was the deal.
And now it's been changed.
We only have to reduce
It's reduced by
3.5
three
million,
point five million.
except that we probably will still have to reduce more than that. I mean, it doesn't,
Does this change the money we're giving to state colleges for fiscal year 26?
No.
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 Does
Okay,
it obligate or intent for fiscal year 27 any difference?
No, this just relates to the structural deficit reduction.
On the part of what the state colleges are supposed to do.
Right.
So, and our 5 million is this is our last $5 million payment.
That's right. Unless the legislators, they'll still have a little bit more to do, as Lynn mentioned here, to bring things to balance.
well, there's two $5 million. There's the bridge money, which was part of the
Right.
transformation expenses you would have. Then there was the need to go and make sure that we had $5 million for 5 years reduced in our budgets, so we could get back to a balanced budget, expense versus revenue. And the easy stuff was done the first couple, 2-3 years.
Right.
The hard stuff, and last year we got a lot of pushback because we still had the $5 million. And we were going through that optimization 2.0, which had an impact on faculty and staff. There were buyouts.
Yeah.
And when you get to something in education that gets to a point where you have to reduce your budget, sooner or later, it has to be personnel, salaries and benefits. So that's now the hard part. We were supposed to get some kind of money to help us do that. And it was reduced to 1.5 million
Yeah.
1 year and then 1.5 million the last year.
Right.
But we still have to reduce those.
Right.
You can't run the deficit, what it really comes down to. And we're still in the hard
You don't need
part.
legislation to tell you.
still gonna,
I have to go over.
We're still gonna get the money.
okay. That's-
Yeah, no, we are not reneging on what we are giving to our
Okay.
university. The change is on the other side of what we are requiring in statute. That we're not saying universities to do.
I have to check on exactly the impact of this because I don't really know it's.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on so we can finish up and we can all vote for the floor.
So the next few sections, again, this is something where the GovRec had similar language and the House just updated the construct because further amendments had to happen for Ledge Council. So this is language relating to the removal of the property transfer tax, clean water surcharge sunset. And so there's a few sections that are just repealing that sunset from different sections of statute, which brings us all the way through section E 715.3. And then the final section, section E 917, added by the Senate. This is that pilot fund appropriation for non-federal disasters.
For road, town highways.
Right.
So this is just totally brand new and it's another, so this is part of the 3.15 million appropriations from the pilot. 1 million for municipal stabilization that we actually, I think, voted on a while ago. It was in the budget adjustment. The other million, which just get here for, now I forget, municipal technical assistance, and then this is the other 1.15. So, who runs the pilot? That's, tax department runs the pilot. We get at some point, I guess we can ask about getting some information on the balance of the pilot fund. Do we know the balance of the pilot fund? We know that.
10 million.
Before we do all this. Yeah, and maybe how much, because obviously paying 100% of the pilot is the first goal, and then it's a question of how much is left after. So if there's some information we can get about that, that would be great. Thank you. What else do you have, Brady?
And then I just would note for the committee, so none of the F sections are in this document, but you can see them in the Senate addendum. So the F sections are, again, just all of the remaining budget adjustment sections.
that we'd already approved and everybody agreed on. Again, say a lot of work. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Great document.
We'll have more questions, I'm sure. Committee, we will be on the floor at 1, and when the floor is over, I have to have a quick huddle about a bill, in the Speaker's office, so 15 minutes after the floor, let's come back to do our other stuff that we have to do.